Okay, I think that started recording now. Great. So just to introduce our speaker, so Leon Cruickshank is the Professor and Chair of Design at the Creative Exchange and a founding member of Imagination Lancaster, at Lancaster University. His research focuses on the development of open and co-design processes that are in the private, public and voluntary sectors. He's worked on a range of projects, including leading the £12 million Beyond Imagination project and the £1.2 million Leapfrog project, looking at new forms of working creatively outside academia. And recently, I think he's been working with some family hubs within government, which I believe he'll be talking about as well today. So I will hand over to Leon if there's no further questions. And yeah, feel free to start sharing now, Leon, now we start the recording. And yeah, over to you.
Hi, everyone. You have to excuse me, I've got the 100-day cold, so I'm on a bit coffee, so hopefully it won't be too bad. So thank you for that introduction. I'm Leon Cruickshank. I work at Lancaster University. This is where I work in Lancaster. Please do come and see us. We'd love to host people. We love to have visitors. The ducks are amazing. It's a great place to come. My work is around creative exchange. So I design exchanges that create new things, and that means I get involved in all sorts of projects, but often they have a public sector or policy implications. And I'm going to show a really simple framework that we use to help question how we are co-designing and how we're working collaboratively. So I'm going to show that. I'm going to talk about a few projects and how this approach has evolved, and then going to show it to you again, and then we're going to have a chat. So I'm going to talk for about half an hour and leave lots of space for questions. So co-designing for real, we use this. It isn't really a model. It's about to be published in the design journal as a non-model. But we wanted to find out what's really going on with co-design and what are the conditions to help co-design be more successful. So we think about adopting an open and playful approach, determining how you're going to work together and how you will recognize success, consider how you will generate, refine, use ideas, and finally, stop when it's good enough and then reflect. And we don't think these are radically disruptive in terms of thinking about design, and there'll be co-designers on here that say, yeah, well, I sort of do that. What we do within our research group and within our practice is that we've started to really explicitly use this as a kind of health check before we start to co-design, but also as an evaluation at the end of this co-design. So we have our practice as co-designers, but really thinking about, okay, do we really know what success looks like here? Explicitly engaging with these questions is a good foil for us to co-design more effectively and for our projects to be more effective. So I'm going to start with a project called Beyond the Castle. This is in Lancaster University. Sorry, this is in Lancaster City. And it's part of a bigger, was part of a bigger European project. So we worked with 2,000 participants, 700 co-designers and 5 design facilitators. Essentially, the castle right in the centre of Lancaster is owned by the Queen. And the area around it is a large part of it is a rough area, and it's got very important archaeology. But the archaeology is being destroyed by the trees and the tree roots. And in Lancaster, if you cut a tree down, you're a bad person. But the archaeology is being damaged. So the council asked us to develop a plan for how to develop this space so you protect the archaeology, protect the trees, and involve communities in this. So we did this project, and we got someone to dress up, found someone who dressed up as a Roman soldier. We did all sorts of events. We took over the one corner of the market square in Lancaster, going to where the people are rather than inviting people to come to us. We did lots of events. These are our youngest participants, and they wanted a cave in the area behind where the castle is. We had lots of impact with this project. We found a new way of trusting people. This is a great statement from a public realm manager. We built very strong relationships with a council through doing this. They moved away from consultation as being, this is what we've decided, what do you think, to a much more open dialogue. The problem that we found is that the council really loved what we did, but they said we could never do that. It's completely impossible for us to replicate this good stuff. We haven't got the budget, we haven't got the skills to work with communities in this way. So it was great, but it was sort of not sustainable. That led to a project called Leapfrog. Excuse me. So this was transforming public engagement by design. It's £1.2 million project, working with Glasgow School of Art and Lancaster University. And it's really the co-design of engagement tools, the co-design of tools and resources that help communities have a stronger voice. And we worked, there's a spectacularly bad hair here on the top left for me. We worked with all sorts of stakeholders. We worked with people who've lived experience of food poverty, people who were in the care system, and librarians. So to co-design tools to help with engagement. So this is had a 2-day workshop with young people who were in care or on the edge of care. And they came to the Imagination Lab in Lancaster, and they developed some tools and resources that would help them engage more effectively with people like their social workers or the other members of authority that they have to engage with quite a lot, and it can be quite difficult. You're a 12-year-old, and you're in a meeting with 5 social workers. It's not easy sometimes to express yourself. So one of the things with working with people who are in care, on the edge of care, is that we really can't show their faces, because there are all sorts of problems with these children, and being identified online or being identified at all can be really problematic. So that's something we had to do. Also, we had young people who were not allowed access to the internet at this time. So we created this newspaper with some of the tools and resources that they designed in this newspaper, so they could show people and they could be proud of it, and it was a nice thing, but it wasn't relying on online access. So this is one of the tools that the young people came up with. And when you are in the care system, the control you have over your life is very much variable. So this is a really dead simple tool. Things I have control over, things I could control or change, and things I cannot control. And the young people came up with this, and it's a graph really, but it's a mechanism by which they can discuss with people where are things now and what would we like them to be. So one of our approaches with creative tools is that we really want them to be used flexibly. And this tool was used. Most of these are PDFs. These are all free, by the way. I'll give you, there's a URL for them, but they're all freely available. And most of them are editable PDFs. So if you can open them in Adobe Reader, free to anyone, you can change the text here. And we found a social worker changed the text because the social worker was working with an orphaned girl. Let's call her Alice. That's not a real name, but Alice's mum passed away, and there was a big fight really, about who in the family would take custody of Alice. It hadn't been sorted out before her mum passed away. And the social worker used this tool to talk to Alice about who was in her family. And the person who was pushing hardest to have custody of Alice was not recognised by Alice as one of her close family. She wasn't on this chart at all. So that helped change that conversation. And one of the things that these tools do is they just give a little bit of structure, a bit of scaffolding to help conversations, to help interactions be more effective. So we created a whole series of toolboxes that are collections of these tools. So we worked with the V&A Museum in London. We've worked with, this is a series of tools about food stories and how to have conversations with people about food if they have limited access. We want to help these conversations because the issue with food and access to food is not, we don't want food banks to be more effective. We want to gather evidence, and we were working with a national charity to get stories and get understanding to make sure that everyone should have access to food. It's outrageous that we don't have access to food and that some people are short of food. So this was about getting stories and helping people get to a point where they could really tell their stories about access to food. So this is also another set of tools which is about a creative evaluation. How do you evaluate without it being a tick box exercise? I don't know if you call them the same, but we used to call them happy sheets at the end of an event, where you'd give people a sheet and you would say, how good was it? And they'd all tick, amazing, 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 right, I'm out of here, without really thinking about it, without it being useful at all. So all these tools are available to download. These are had to track the use of these tools. So this is a little bit of an old graph now, but they've been used around the world in over 120 countries, from Andorra to Zimbabwe. And we came across people using these tools all over because they're really flexible and there are loads of them and they're really useful. And so we really enjoyed the Leapfrog project. And like all projects, at the end there was a but. And the but is that this is a Homer Simpson spice rack. And so we spent 3-4 years designing tools, and there is no tool that's good enough to accommodate a lack of skill and a lack of the person using it. No tool will be good enough to accommodate someone who isn't skilled. And that got us thinking, okay, well, what are those skills? What are those soft things? What are those questions we should be asking about when we're doing co-design? And that's where we came to these questions. Consider how you will refine and use your ideas, adopt an open and playful approach, determine how you work together, how you recognize success, and stop when it's good enough, then reflect. And I want to talk about a project that's still ongoing, but and we finished the first phase. And it's going to sound a little bit grim, but it's not grim at all. And one of the things some people push back on is like, can you always have an open and playful approach? And when I get asked that, I always talk about this project. This is a project called Born into Care, and it's about in Blackpool. There's a high proportion of babies are taken into care almost immediately after birth, within 12 months of birth, and sometimes on the day of birth. And there is a large project to understand why is it so high in Blackpool, and also it's not unusual for parents to have multiple babies taken into care at birth. There is one mother that has had 13 babies and none of them have been parented to adulthood with her. So I was asked to do a project to map the process by which young people, babies are taken into care. And so we did a co-design project with social workers, with health workers, also though with parents with lived experience of having their children taken into care. And we came together and it was fascinating. And one of the first things we did is we had a social contract about how we will behave. And there were things like there was always a room that if anyone was triggered, they could step into that room and they could take a break from things and we would respect each other and those things. And the social worker who has been 30 years a social worker, he said, one of the things we should do is we should have fun. We should know this is serious business and this is going to help people's lives. And that we've had experiences that are not good. Everyone in this room has, but we can have fun. So that helped set the tone for this project in that we had 8 full days together, 1 day a week for 8 weeks, so quite high intensity. And we worked together to map this process, but also develop a way of communicating the process that would be useful for families, parents, grandparents, but also professionals. So these resources would only ever be used in a conversation between a professional and a parent. It isn't something that would be sent out. So we started out with really simple thing is a superhero. So what we found is that if you get people to think about what would their superpowers be, if you were a superhero, what would it be? The superpowers they identify are actually their weaknesses, but because it's framed as a superpower, it isn't framed as a deficit. It's framed as an amazing thing. So one of the people here has talked about hostage negotiations as a superpower. And this was a really quick exercise just to get people thinking about, okay, well, what if you had a magic wand, what would you do with it? And it just draws on a really simple tool that we developed. These dotted lines just make it really easy for you to draw someone, and it looks like you're pretty good at drawing. You just pick which dotted lines to make. You can gender it or not. And we have the Clark Kent side on the left. This is your day-to-day, and we have the superpowers on the right. This led into a kind of more conventional co-design project. It was fascinating that the professionals didn't have a common view about what this process was. And if they don't have a common view, it's not surprising that the clients they work with have mixed messages. So even throughout this process, we did a testing thing where we got people to write scenarios of concerns that may be raised. And there were 20 scenarios that came from experts or people with lived experience of this, and they were harrowing. One of them was, the scenario was, I'm a Polish sex worker and in a 1-bedroom flat, and I am having clients with my family there, and there's a baby on the way. So really difficult things. Even in this context, the professionals were able to be serious and talk about these and role play these and how the conversations would work, but it was still light, and it was still people were still able to be creative because we brought this lightness to it and this playfulness. So these are the outcomes. They're not downloadable on they're not easily downloadable. They're not findable online because these aren't the sort of thing that's just sent out to people. These are things that are given to people in a particular context in a meeting. But you will, this is the simple map. And so working with a graphic designer here, I've got a background in graphic design amongst other things. But so these were designed in Adobe Suite. But actually, I'm really pleased that we turned these into, this is a PowerPoint slide. So all the buildings are icons you can move around, all the roads can be moved around, all the text here is a text box. So this document, this process is always changing a little bit, but it's changing a little bit all the time. So this, instead of having boxes and boxes of this printed and they go out of date, this is print on demand, and it's being edited slightly all the time and reprinted. And that's, for me, that's a really like a living way to go forward with designing for public sector workers who are absolutely capable of editing a PowerPoint slide. This is an example of the more complicated version of the map, and there are 4 of these. So that's a sort of run through how we co-design, how I co-design, and these questions that we ask ourselves during, but particularly before and after a co-design challenge. This has been published, and it's about to be published, even more widely. If you want to see the latest publications, or you want me to send you a pre-press version, then drop me an email. I've got 3 things that I want to talk about my work in progress now. First of all, I'm writing a book called We Don't Have Time for Shortcuts, which is about planning and commissioning co-design. This is because the Born into Care project, I said I want 8 days co-design, and the commissioner said, well, can you not do it in 4 or 5? And I'm really old, so I've done this a bit, and I said, no, actually, do need that time. Talking to them now, it was like, oh my goodness, this is like a 6-month project. How did you get so much done in the time? So, and I was thinking, as a commissioner, how would I know, really? How would I know what is feasible in the time? How do I know what resources are, what it's reasonable to make? My experience is lots of co-design projects, everyone has a good time and there's some great stuff, but often they don't land. So I'm writing a book about essentially how to land co-design projects so they're really transformational. So speak to me more about that. This is me with some face paint on. I'm doing a project with family hubs in Blackburn, and the idea is we're working with parents to help them be more resilient, but also help them be more stronger activists for themselves. And then I'm working with hub staff and other people in the public sector to cope with this wave of activism that's coming their way that we started. And then through this double move, we want to change the relationship between parents and the and family hubs to try and make a local change in the system. So that is ongoing. We're 10 months into a 24-month project with that. I almost could have showed you a picture of me in an inflatable dinosaur costume, but I didn't do the inflatable dinosaur costume for the family days we ran in August this year. But maybe next time I speak to you. The last thing is, so I have a book, Flourishing by Design. Now I am really relaxed about promoting this book because it's free. Published by Routledge. Anyone can download it. I'll put the link to it in the chat when I'm finished. But so this is a whole series of books about chapters about how to flourish, not just get by, but really do well and have a great life. It's got chapters. So I've got a chapter in there as well as me editing it, but also chapters by Chris Frayling and Dayan Sudzik and Camilla Buchanan and all sorts of people. I sort of joke, this is great for designers because the chapters are really short. They're like 3,000 or 4,000 words, so they're really digestible. So please do have a look at the book and share it around. It was an absolute privilege actually to be able to make this completely free. So that's a kind of hopefully a conversation starter. Please do get in touch. If you want to come to Lancaster and see what we do, you'd be really welcome. Also, I'm very much open for further conversations, whether it's online or there's an excuse to come to wherever you are to see you. Let's keep talking. So with that, I'm going to open up. I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions or comments.
Brilliant. Thank you, Leon. Yes, as always, we've got a couple of questions in the chat, but please feel free to put your hand up as well. But yes, perhaps we will have a look in the chat first, Leon, whilst people have a think about questions and then pop their hands up. So just scrolling up. So Laura Tong, are you using other tools that incorporate physicality, dance, spatial positioning, externalities in your approaches?
Yes, and so one of the things with Leapfrog is we put quite a bit of money into the evaluation, and we sometimes we'd go back to people and they would say, "Oh, we're not using the tools," and we'd be sad about that. And sometimes they weren't using them, but more often than not, it became part of their practice. So they thought they weren't using them, but they'd incorporated them. And one of the things about the circles is that we often see a translation into the physical from something that is an A3 sheet. So we've seen quite a lot of that. And I've done things in the past with working with choreographers to kind of dance and physical theatre, but that's a sort of different sort of approach. But I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, we often find there's a translation into the physical so that you're not mark making, and that works with groups who are a bit nervous about writing.
Brilliant. Thank you again, Laura. Feel free if you want to put your hand up if you want to follow up on any of that. And then we've got quite a few. Oh yeah, Laura. Yes, go on. Go ahead.
Thank you for that opportunity. Yeah, I was just thinking because the reason I brought that up is I'm quite aware on how the use of physicality and expression is useful for narrating our internal space in terms of trauma, and the kinds of things that you're dealing with here are unquestionably traumatic, I would say. So it was kind of where you found examples of that working very well, that I was particularly interested in. So it does sound like you have done some work with like dance, but there's something around if you've got the ring tool there, sometimes maybe it's a test of people actually standing in like their physical spaces and stuff. But yeah, thank you. It does sound really, really fascinating. Honestly, I'm just listening to this and thinking, I wish I was doing his job.
Well, come to Lancaster. We're always looking for good people. So when we do that physicality, it needs to be handled carefully. But increasingly, when I say, "Oh, this is like run around," it's like the people who are as old as me and older go, "Oh yeah, it is a little bit like run around," which was like a kids' game show when I was 8 or something. But also, with the born into care stuff, that is not really suitable for that sort of physicality, because you're having serious one-to-one conversations, and this is acting as like a boundary object to help explain things, but also to try and reduce the tension of the eye contact by having something to focus on.
Excellent. And I think the next one is from Katrina. Again, Katrina, we're happy to jump in afterwards if you want to. But how do you evaluate your tools with users? For example, the journey into care at birth.
We're just in the process of evaluating these. I should have said so we had 8 weeks, which included 2 rounds of testing, and then a few of the co-design group are using these tools with their clients. And Claire, the nurse you saw with the stickers all over her, her first set of clients she used these with in Blackpool. Mum and dad, both 13. And so if ever there was a need for a clear description of the process, So it's that. So what we're doing is that we're using it in a real context with real clients, and we're also talking to a wider lived experience group about these, and we're really doing the evaluation really with the lived experience group and people as they come towards the end of the process of this. So not at the start of the process, because honestly they've got other things to think about. So we're sort of well, I say we, the professionals are using this tool all the time with their so it's being used across Blackpool. They're using it with their clients, and then as their clients come towards the end of the system, so in the map we've got the tram system, but there's also a bus system, and the bus system is when you kind of leave the formal bit into another kind of set of support. We're doing interviews, but as people get towards the end of their journey rather than when they're in the middle of the journey. That's I hope that answers your question. But the real answer is that when people are in the process, we're evaluating with the people the professionals more than the clients, because the clients don't have any capacity. They're in a bad place, and we don't want to add to their cognitive load by saying, oh, by the way, can you fill this form in about whether you like this? It's like they've got more important things.
So yeah, Katrina, yeah, feel free.
Hi, Joan. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I guess I was interested. I'm not a policy person. I'm a user researcher. So my background is digital mostly. So yeah, it was more. I was kind of interested in the methodology behind that evaluation, and also, so thank you for sharing a bit of that. I was interested in more as well in terms of accessibility and users with different accessibility needs, and how you might test that with different users with different needs. I understand, yeah, you wouldn't be evaluating that necessarily with people with lived experience, but certainly amongst
in terms
users as well.
Yeah, in terms of evaluation with our Leapfrog tools, before we worked with people, we would ask them 3 questions about their expectations and their motivation. Because what we found is that if you're working with a group and or an individual and they've really changed, they don't think they've changed because they've really changed. So having those really, really simple responses right at the beginning, we found that incredibly helpful to then go back to them in 6 months or a year and saying, oh, you said that a year ago. And so often we would say, oh, that doesn't sound like me. No, I don't think like that anymore. I think this, or I've changed in this way. So for those of you who are sort of on the edge of academia, the Leapfrog project was well regarded impact case study. And lots of the evidence for our impacts and transformations came from showing people something from right at the beginning of the process and using that to help them understand their difference of thinking or difference of practice now compared to when they started. And accessibility is an important but a really different conversation, and it's one of the reasons why I'm really glad that the health team have got editable resources that they could create a different language version easily with someone with that language to hand. They don't need to employ a graphic designer or go to their comms team to get them to edit InDesign files.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, we've got quite a few questions with a lot of thumbs ups, so obviously some popular questions. Next one is, how have you reconciled the remuneration of the people with lived experience in the projects for their time?
It's a difficult thing. So when we worked with people with restricted access to food, we worked with people in Biker, in Newcastle, and also young people in Blackburn, and we provided vouchers for them. Also in Biker, we got them. One of the things we did is to create a cookbook for the sort of food you would get from a food bank, and to described in a way that it sits with the people of Biker, but to test whether people's recipes could get into the cookbook, we would have to test them. So we would go out and buy the ingredients, and then everyone tried this meal out. So essentially there were a whole series of meals that we cooked for them, that weren't charity, but were them testing whether those recipes were effective enough to go into this vernacular cookbook. So try and it isn't always money, I suppose, or a voucher that is a way of valuing people's contribution. But increasingly, when I'm writing bids, I'm costing in that there's what is the value that all experts bring, including experts to experience, and what is the benefit they get from it. And that might be money or a voucher, but it might be other things as well. And also increasingly costing in things like childcare, which really changes the shape of a project, to make that accessible, because it's really not. It's a significant cost. So we're looking for ways to reduce the barriers for engagement and recognise the value that people bring, whether they're professional experts or experts to experience. I guess I'm saying it's a moving target, but we think about it a lot because it's really important.
Yeah, it was me who brought that up. I've done quite a lot of community co-design, and that was one of the big issues that we had, especially when you got MPs coming to ask them about having a photo shoot with groups that had done really well in the community, and they were volunteers, and that MP was on £40 an hour, and then we were offering a voucher. There seems to be a massive disconnect between lived experience expertise and professionalisation expertise in relation to remuneration, and I hope that bids will price the lived experience at the same price as they would a lecturer or an MP or me, a service designer, at what hourly rate we're getting, and they could actually have the same hourly rate, even if it was in kind. But I've yet to see that happen. I was just interested to see how you were coping with that as well. But yeah, I didn't expect it to have been solved, but it's an interesting area.
Yeah, I should have said I'm totally solved it, but I'm not telling you because it's secret. And then we could have moved on. No, it is a problem. I mean, I use the NIHR scales because the health has got a very long, well-established tradition of participation, and they have different scales for different levels of kind of intellectual effort or engagement, I suppose. So if you're asking someone to lead a presentation, then it's a different rate for someone to attend a meeting as a member giving their view. And so it's a moving target, but we need to take it seriously. But and that also means that everyone, just in the way that you wouldn't say any service designer is as good as any other service designer, it's like participants can be really good and bring lots of value, or they can be on their phone and be completely ignoring you for most of the time. So I think there's a kind of there's a joint responsibility in terms of participation and contribution and value, and how those things relate to each other isn't a straightforward thing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting thoughts there. We've got a few more questions, probably about 4, I think, coming in the chat. How do you, so it's from Jodie, how do you approach different perspectives or circumstances into the final solution?
What we've found is that if you give people a genuine, if you genuinely listen to people and you give them a fair voice, that really helps. So for the Beyond the Castle project, the area beyond the castle is it's about a square kilometre of sloping ground towards the river. It's fields with some woodland, and someone said we should turn it into a coach park, a nicely done coach park, but a coach park, it'd be really good. It would save lots of traffic problems, and so that idea was respected. All the ideas that we gathered from the 2,000 participants were shared and organized and categorized by our volunteers. But what we found is that that person wasn't upset that their idea wasn't taken up. They were happy that their idea was recognized, and they could see that that wasn't the way everyone else was thinking. So I think transparent inclusion helps, and also there's a thing sometimes with co-design. People come into the room, and the process of co-design is they all come with an idea of what they think the solution should be. And the process is getting people to compromise. And it's sort of beating people down and making their, like, what they think should happen spread out a little bit. And eventually they overlap. And everyone is compromised. And that is where you put the pin and you say everyone can agree with that. But what you're really doing is everyone is equally unhappy with it. So what I try and do is if people are coming in with an assumption of what the solution is, trying to get people to build up and to create something new that isn't about them compromising on their solution. It's about taking the fundamentals of what they want and that coming together. And that's the art, I think, of co-design, as opposed to design by committee. That's the difference, I think. Building up to develop a new consensus, rather than getting people to be unhappy at their ideas being diluted down sufficiently so they overlap.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we've got a few more questions to get through, maybe some 10 minutes or so left. So from Lara, do you have any involvement in what happens after your co-design and research outputs and the journey to informing potential policy changes? I'm interested to hear what your lessons learned are in terms of landing co-design outputs into the wider processes.
Yes, I do often. So I've worked with our city council really closely, with the not on the elected side. I try not to work with elected politicians really, because if they really like you, then it means loads of other people really don't like you, and it's sort of tribal. So I try and work with the public servants. So with the district council, we worked to the Proud project, and then we worked the Leapfrog. At the end of the Leapfrog project, the person who's the chief exec now said, by the way, Leon, in a presentation said, this has saved us £2 million. And this was news to us. We didn't know this, but through activating friends groups, they brought in lots of money. And that allowed the green space in Lancaster to be at a better quality, better maintained than before the 60% austerity cut. So we've got very good relationships with the city council. And so I had this big project called Beyond Imagination. And one of the things we did there is we set up Lancaster Insights Hub, which is a venue, an organisation that links the university to the district council in a really broad bandwidth way. So it's not dependent on personal relationships, because if someone moves, you've got a good relationship with someone and they move, then suddenly it's gone. So this is a kind of broad bandwidth collaboration structure that if you want to do work with the council in the university or university council, you go to the Insights Hub, which meets regularly and is a kind of vehicle for sustained collaboration and sustained understanding building. So that's sort of one of the ways that we could that we build long-term relationships, I think. And then projects happen, but they happen within the context of an ongoing relationship. The same with CVS and the same with, I've worked with the library at the county level a lot. I could talk more about landing things, but it feels like I've had too much coffee, to be honest, and I'm blathering on a bit.
I think that happens at every point in the day in our minds, doesn't it? At some point, you always get that kick in the head, don't you? About that. But no, it's really interesting sort of hearing all of that, and I think landing is something we all think about, isn't it? Really, in the long term, it's particularly something we think about. Yeah, just keen to get on through the next few questions from people. So from Damien, what are some of the common resistances you've encountered in getting buy-in from senior leadership in councils to do things in such a sort of co-creative, joyful, experimental approaches? How do you meet those resistances? I think that's a really good one that covers cross-government, definitely.
The outcome of the Beyond the Castle project was an interactive co-design exhibition, and this is so where we got people to, we led people through every single idea we had from the 2,000 participants, and then we got them to take some issues and co-design something and put that on a box, and we created towers of boxes. And we were talking with the council early on, and they didn't really know us. And they said, "Oh, we're really happy for an open exploratory position, open exploratory project, but can you just tell us what you're going to end up with?" And we were like, "No, we can't. We can't. Sorry, we can't." And so a few lessons from there. I wrote a paper about this called "Fast Flowing Calm Waters." It was about the role of a design manager and my role to kind of have sometimes quite straightforward conversations with people in the district council to make the space for the creativity to happen. We found senior people will buy in if you don't ask them to do anything, and they really like it. If you do an event and there are 5 or 6 pictures of people having a good time, sending those to those senior people so they can share them around, and they think, "Oh, everyone's having a good time and they're associating this with me, lovely." You're still not asking them to do anything, but when they do have that buy-in, when they say yes, this is a good thing to do, then the 8 or 9 levels of people underneath those senior people have got their ass covered, so they are also relaxed. So when I started this out, I was talking to a senior engagement officer and the head of green space, and in academia it's quite flat really, but I didn't realize there were like loads of levels before. So we were talking to this person saying, "Oh, we spoke to Richard about this, he's really keen." It's like, "You speak to Richard Tooley?" So we learned from that non-demanding buy-in from people at the top is really useful, and they really like pictures they can share to show, because they don't have to read anything and they can tell whether someone's having a good time. So we use that as a way of sort of calming the waters when we have this uncertainty. So we kept the uncertainty, and they were okay because they thought, well, at least people are having a good time. And also we were paying. We weren't asking them for money. It was our money we were spending because it was on the project.
Excellent. And I think we've got one more, and again, there's probably a bit more time in case anyone wants to put their hand up. But this from Philip or Phil. Elizabeth Sanders has written on harnessing people's creativity for idea generation and some of the challenges and approaches to this. What challenges do you come when engaging participants in creative activities?
So I wrote a book on this, more or less, called Open Design and Innovation, Facilitating Creativity in Everyone. That isn't free. But in the book, and I argue that groups of people are creative in ways that are not the same as the way the designers are creative. And I've worked with the designers where they've said, let's do something really natural, really easy with people. Let's just do some brainstorming. And brainstorming was invented by Alex Osborne in the late 50s. So what I argue and what when I work with my group is how are people that we are working with creative? How are they naturally creative? And how can we be creative in that way? So I did a project with librarians, and there are 8 categories of library. And the one is the massive library. We've only got one in Lancashire, in Preston, and then 8 is the mobile vans. And I wanted the librarians, there were a mix of experiences. Is there another category we could have for these? Is there a different way we could categorize them? And they couldn't understand the question. They said, but we've got categories. And there's like big, small, mobile. So for them, categories were really, really important. It was a world view. And they were intensely creative, but they were creative in their own way. So I think, so that's my one thing, is that everyone doesn't think like a designer. We were trained, I was trained as a designer 5, 7, however many years you think about it. Not everyone is creative in the same way that we are. And we should be good. We should be flexible in the way we're creative. So the onus should be on us being creative like other people. And the other thing is that co-design doesn't mean that everyone is creative. It means that everyone has the potential to be creative. And it doesn't matter whether it's a cleaner or a CEO or a dog walker, they have the right to not be creative. In the same way, I've worked with hundreds of designers, and actually even very successful designers are not necessarily the most flexible creative thinkers. They found a recipe that works for them, and good luck to them. So I think those 2 things, don't assume that people are being creative in your way, and that's the only way. I sometimes talk about post-participatory design, because a lot of participatory design is inviting people to participate in my design process as a designer. I'm interested in the other way. Design is going out and being creative in the way other people. And secondly, don't set people up to fail if they're not creative. I'm all about setting up exchanges where people can have the best possible input. And that might be being super creative, but then there might be other ways that they can contribute that are unique to them. So not assuming that everyone is equally creative is a good thing, and being creative in the way that other people are creative. Those are the 2 things that I think probably it is. I think Liz might she might agree with me, who knows, but she might not as well, because she's got her own view.
Excellent. I think unless I've missed any extra questions, we probably got time to maybe a very, very, very short sort of brief one. But I think I've covered them all, but do let me know if I've missed one. And if there's any more thoughts you've got, Leon, I can probably leave it there.
So Philip, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend, well, I am recommending my book, but I would be much more interested in you saying, come and chat to me about it. A lot of what's in the book is freely available open source research papers, so don't get hung up on the book. But just to everyone, I'm really passionate about how to help communities, and this is a community as much as a community of dog walkers work together. And I'm committed and excited about how design can do those things, and we're doing more with Born Into Care. If you'd like to have a chat, do not be shy. Just drop me an email. And we'll have a chat online, we'll have a chat in person. I'm really keen to talk more and know about all the great things that you do. So that's an open offer.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and we'll make sure to put those details out in our post-event email as well. And it's good to see some connections in the chat as well. That's been fantastic. I hope you'll join me in just virtually applauding Leon for just a fantastic session there. That I felt, yeah, so good to be able to talk to an expert in both the theory and the practice. I think that's often quite rare. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Final closing thing before we leave, I'm just going to post our next event and the sort of list to our community as well. So feel free to join any of those and keep an eye on what's coming up next, and keep an eye out for our email post event as well, where we'll share Leon's details as well. So thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it all and appreciate all the questions and the conversation. That was fantastic. And yes, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Leon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks very much.